Good morning. Good morning. My name is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of Nonprofit Utopia. Just want to say thank you so much for joining us this morning. As you are aware, we have finished our fiscal year in a number of our organizations. So if your organization has a fiscal year ending June 30th, I'm sure you are very, very busy trying to make sure that you get your 990s done, get your audited financials, and even if you don't do an audit, I'm pretty sure you're caught up in year end stuff, right? And usually that means getting involved, right, with your Form 990s, right? We have to fill those out every year. And the Form 990, as you are also aware, that's a form that we fill out in lieu of doing a of 1040, right? So it's an information return and it requires much more disclosure than your form 1040. In exchange for being tax exempt, you have to really give up all the goods of your information for the most part. And it's interesting, the more you share, the more likely you are to raise more money. So we're going to do, a couple slides that are a review from last week where we basically walked you through how you read a Form 990 and what the various sections help the reader to understand. Today, we're going to focus on how you can use that document, which is typically used as a financial reporting document or information reporting document and typically collects dust throughout the year. We're going to show you how you can use that constantly for your own marketing purposes. And for our purpose, we're going to be focusing on how you can use it for fundraising. As you'll find out, different people or different audiences may be looking at the document for different purposes, but we're going to look at it from a funder's perspective and then look at ways that you can, in fact, increase your fundraising as a result. All right, so let's get to it. We are again looking at using IRS Form 990 as a marketing tool. Again, this is an information return, and typically we focus on the financial information, but we're going to show you how you can take advantage of this process to increase your marketing. So, we're going to look at how you leverage the relationship between financial disclosure and fundraising. And remember, your Form 990 is a form of disclosure, right? It's not, you know, the same as filing taxes. It's actually worse in many ways than filing tax returns. I'm going to show you how to use this process as an opportunity to increase your fundraising. And then we're going to help you to understand the relationship between Form 990 and your GuideStar profile. And then we're going to show you how to utilize your GuideStar profile to increase transparency and fundraising. All right, we don't have enough time to do a deep dive into the GuideStar profiles. We did about a year or so ago a video on the GuideStar profiles. You can go to our YouTube channel and look at that. I'm hoping that we touch on this at least enough to jar your memory, get you interested in filing your GuideStar profile. All right, so by way of review, we're going to talk about what a Form 990 is. I promise you we won't go into the level of detail that we went into last week. So basically, a Form 990 is an informational return. You do this as a nonprofit in lieu of filing taxes. In exchange for your tax exempt status, you are required to be much more transparent than those of us who are operating private organizations. Not typically, the Form 990 is due 5.5 months after your fiscal year ends. So, depending on when your fiscal year ends, you have 5.5 months to do your audit, do your 990, and turn that into the IRS. At the same time, you have to file an AG 990 IL if you're in the state of Illinois. So you're going to be filing the equivalent at the state level of a Form 990, very summary financial information, but it should be consistent with the Form 990. Every organization has to file Form 990. All right, so who reads Form 990 and why? Who else other than Valerie Leonard reads Form 990 and why do they do it? So there are a number of audiences for Form 990s. First and foremost, we think about the IRS, right? They're not on this list, but that's a given, right? The IRS is really your friend. Believe it or not, the IRS is not asking you to do these information returns just for enforcement purposes. It's not just for enforcement, is not just because they're trying to regulate you, even though those are two major reasons, but they're also using Form 990 as an opportunity to learn more about the nonprofit sector, to even strengthen the nonprofit sector. They take this information and actually refine their policies and provide even more technical assistance beyond filling out the form, helping you to actually strengthen your organization. Donors and grantors, they're interested in the information. Obviously, they want to make sure that you're fulfilling your mission and that your programs are in alignment with your mission. They also are very, very interested in governance and stewardship. And the information on that return helps them get a sense beyond the conversations with you how your organization is actually being governed, not necessarily managed, but how is it being governed? And at the same time, it does give you insights into how it's being managed, how well you are in compliance, because they're not going to be giving you any funding if you're not in compliance. Why? Because your compliance impacts their compliance. And then, two, your compliance also gives them an indication of how well you steward your gifts and how well you manage the assets that you have. Um, Donors and grantors also want to be able to understand your accomplishments. So, the way the 990 is written, there's plenty of opportunity, even though it's not explicit, but there is plenty of opportunity to talk about your your accomplishments and how they align with your mission. And I'm going to show you how to do that. Most people are just focused on, the financial part. And even when they have these opportunities to talk about accomplishments, many people don't take the opportunity to go into the level of detail that they can. Potential board members, they're interested in Form 990s because remember, as people who are governing the organization, they have a fiduciary responsibility to make sure that you are wise stewards and that you're in compliance with the federal and state and local governments. So they want to make sure, one, that your your mission and your programs are in alignment because after all the buck is going to stop with them. They also want to make sure that the governance is tight because remember the buck stops with them. Anybody, the staff can be wrong as all get out, but at the end of the day, it's going to be the board members who are held accountable. Your creditors and banks, they're obviously going to be interested in this because they want to understand, your financial background as well as governance and policies and how compliant you are. Compliance is really important, as you'll see down the road, because everybody has a stake in how well you comply, because the extent to which you comply with federal rules and regulations will give them a sense for how well you're going to comply with their own rules. Your vendors and service providers, they're going to be using your Form 990 to glean information, one, to know, whether or not you're quote unquote worthy of taking a chance on, that they want to get a sense for whether or not you'll be in a position to pay them for the goods and services, And also for marketing purposes, they want to understand who you're doing business with. And then external evaluators, they'll take into account your governance structures, policies, and compliance to, again, to be able to write a strong report for you and make some recommendations as to how you might improve. And then they also want to assess program accomplishments and the alignment with mission. And they'll have other tools that they can use to do that, but they want to make sure that every step in the process, you know, that you do as organizations, or every process is in sync, right? So, those are the different audiences. We're going to be focusing today on donors and grantors and how you can make yourself more attractive to donors and grantors. All right, so how exactly can you use Form 990 for marketing purposes? One, you want to use your responses as opportunities to portray your organization in the best light. There are pages and pages of information asking you tons of questions on your business practices, your business relationships. They want to get a sense for how well the organization is managed, want to get a sense for what policies you have in place to manage conflict as well as to manage the organization, conflicts of interest, whistleblowers and document retention, et cetera, et cetera. You can also, in addition to responding to the questions, that they have in the main body, you can use Schedule O to actually go into more detail. And we're going to show you some examples of how you can leverage Schedule O to provide more information than you normally would. And this will really help you stand out with with potential funders, and also help you stand out against the other 2 million organizations that we have in the United States alone, right? Another way you can use Form 990 for marketing purposes is to actually post it on your website, and we'll show you some examples of how that is done or can be done. It doesn't have to be limited to the example that we're going to show, but we'll just share that. You can also claim your GuideStar profile. And just a word about GuideStar. GuideStar serves basically as a clearinghouse for information on over 2 million organizations in the United States, right? So people tend to go to GuideStar to, look at Form 990s, right? So whether or not you actually submit your Form 990 to GuideStar, they have access to it. They have an agreement with the IRS, so they are collecting information on you, and they will write your bare bones profile. It's in your best interest, though, to claim the GuideStar profile and provide information so that you can control your own narrative and provide even more information and answer any questions people might have and be, more proactive. And then you can use it for marketing purposes, apply for your GuideStar seal of transparency, right? And remember, the basis for these GuideStar profiles is the Form 990, and then they build on the basic information that they glean from the Form 990 to give you an opportunity to give even more information. And they've actually found that people who give more information tend to get more money, right? They build up that know, like, and trust factor much quicker, and also the fact that the information is out there and it's available for anybody to look at it. They don't have to necessarily come to you. They can take brief notes and then talk to you if they are interested. So enough of that. So one of the best sections, I think, for marketing purposes is part 3, statement of programs and services. Here you have an opportunity to share your mission. And some organizations, rather than talk about their mission, because their mission may be very, very short, very, very broad, and might not give a good sense for the work they do. Some organizations take this as an opportunity to make a statement where they can expound on the work that they do, the why they do, and a little bit about the impact. And they might even carry it on to another section to, give you even more detail. This section also, lets people know whether or not you have any major changes. If you have undergone a strategic change, this might give some information here. And then the part that's most telling here is 4A, where you talk about the expenses for various programs, usually your top three programs. And if you need to provide, more information, you could do that either in Schedule O or an additional piece of paper. But here you get to talk about the program, talk about the expenses, and talk about the revenue that you get, and then the grants that you get. Remember, revenues are the income that you generate from some product or service of the program. A grant is the money that you get as a result of, writing a proposal. You don't have to pay it back. These blank lines here are your opportunity. Most people typically are very, very brief here. They just kind of give very high level details, not even much detail, but high level information about the program, right? One or two sentences. I've seen, some of your organizations that are most effective. I have seen them not only use all of these lines, but go into more detail so people can really, really get behind the numbers that they might see in this document and really, really understand the organization, how it functions, and their accomplishments. So don't be ashamed to brag here. And remember, in your absence, one of the only things that people who are thinking about giving to you would have is this Form 990. So this section gives you a sense for the types of programs, your accomplishments, have you really made a difference? How much money was spent? Where are you allocating the most of your resources? And then for those of us who are looking critically, we can get a sense for whether or not your activities, your programs are in alignment with your reason that you say that you started the organization. So some of the strategies that, I would suggest that you use to optimize the opportunities presented in this section would be: one, include a mission statement or a compelling statement that describes what the organization does and its impact. And you want to make sure that the program descriptions are in line with the mission. And in those instances where you're engaged in activities or programming that doesn't seem, to readily suggest that it's in alignment with your mission, this is an opportunity for you to kind of link, you know, link it together, show how things that don't seem like they go together actually do go together. And again, you can tell a story that conveys the value that you're conveying onto the people that you're serving. How is it that, your services are valuable? And when we talk about value, we're not necessarily talking about the exchange of money. In many cases, you are giving away your time. But if people don't value your service, right, they're not even going to take the time to let you give it to them, right? So value can be expressed in terms of the number of people who are willing to consume your services, right? Another way you can convey value is look at the impact. What has actually changed for the people that you're serving or the community that you're serving as a direct impact or as a direct cause of being, engaged in your program. And that will help funders understand too whether or not they're getting a good bang for their buck. Remember, funders are, they're buying impact, right? Units of impact. They're also buying reach. How many people can you reach? How many people can you change? And what cost per person, right? And you can convey that in those sections. All right, so I want to give you an example from the North Lawndale Employment Network. The North Lawndale Employment Network, for those of you who may not know, they are one of the premier organizations on Chicago's west side, I would say in the city, and I would even say nationally now, where they work to transform the lives of people who are formerly incarcerated and other people who are difficult to place. So there are a number of placement programs and supportive service programs that they provide, right? And I think they have done an awesome job of using their Form 990 and related processes to convey value, right? So here, when they fill out uh, part three, I think they're very, very succinct. They have their mission statement, which is to improve the earnings potential of North Lawndale residents through innovative employment initiatives that lead to economic advancement and an improved quality of life, right? So I think that's a very powerful statement. And then they speak to their top programs, right? They have 4 programs. They indicate how much money they're spending, right, on each program. So you get a sense for, where their priorities are in terms of allocating resources. So they have allocated the most resources to the U-Turn Permitted program. This is one of their first programs. This is their flagship program. Of the $4.9 million they're spending in programs, about 3.2 million goes for the U-Turn Permitted program. All right, and as you can see, the U-Turn Permitted, our flagship job readiness training program, is for men and women who have barriers to employment. During the 4 weeks, participants cover topics such as resume building, mock interviews, proper attire, and more. So when you read that, you get a really good sense for what that program is about. And they do that for each one of their programs. I promise you, I'm not going to read all of this. If you're interested in reading this for yourself, you can go to GuideStar, do a search for North Lawndale Employment Network, and you can look at their profile, and they will have their Form 990s linked there, and you can download them for yourself. I wanted to look at Candid. Why? Candid is the parent company for GuideStar. I wanted to see how the people who are actually um, asking people to give their Form 990s, taking the information and gleaning it and selling the information, quite frankly, I want to see how they would respond, since they're encouraging us to actually give them information. I want to see how they use their Form 990s. So under the section, under line 1, briefly describe the mission. They don't write anything about their mission at all. They say see Schedule O. So Schedule O is a schedule where you can go into more detail. You can answer some questions that you might not necessarily have room for. If you see that there's some answer that as it stands alone might cause some concern, you might use Schedule O to be proactive and describe what's going on, right? So they said see Schedule O. And when it comes to describing their programs, they say see Schedule O. So they can go into much more detail, but they do give you a sense for how much money they spent for each program, how much revenue they generated, and how much grant money is coming in. I think what's very, very interesting is the folks at Candid, at least for the GuideStar program, they're not depending on grants to be sustainable. They got a business model. They're generating revenue. So you can see that uh, they do share expenses. They don't have any grants, but they're generating revenue from their products and services. So on line 4A, it says see Schedule O for a narrative on the products that we have to offer. On 4B, it says see Schedule O for narrative on the public interest and other programs. They're generating 31 points, what, almost 31.3 million just for their products and services. So I think that's a lesson for other nonprofits. Think of ways that you cannot depend so heavily on grants, and even if you can get to a point where you don't depend on grants at all, that would be wonderful. Run your organization like the wonderful businesses that they can be. All right, so they've got a total amount $26 million and some change on the expenses for their programs, right? And then they go in Schedule O to explain, I would say ad nauseum. I think I met my match. Anybody who knows me knows I never met a word I didn't like, and I tend to go into a lot of detail. This is only a section of their response on Schedule O, which is really supporting the answers that they provided in Part 3. All right, so on line 1, rather than just speak to a mission, they actually provided a mini problem statement. They give you their why, and I think this is really interesting. It says every year, millions of nonprofits spend trillions of dollars around the world. Candid finds out where that money comes from, where it goes, and why it matters. This gives us a unique platform where we can surface data and insights to inform decision making, streamline the grant making process, and ensure more equitable access to funding. Candid gets you the information you need to do good. So you find value in that. You understand their why. You understand, how they're actually using the money that they have. They don't at this point get into the nitty gritty, but you really do understand the impact that they could be making. Now, this space in yellow, that's something that I highlighted myself because I thought it was really, really interesting. And I promise I'm not going to read all of this, but I'll just kind of summarize what they're talking about. Um, the first part of the paragraph, they speak to how their programs align with their vision. Remember, when funders are looking to determine whether or not they want to give you money, they really, your more sophisticated ones are going to look at how your programs align with your mission. So they're telling you, what the alignment is. They're telling you what their programs are and what their services are. And they're also indicating too, the social sector is fragmented, and that leaves individual organizations culturally and operationally isolated. Through a common profile, we can increase the throughput of basic organizational information. We can reduce waste, reveal diversity, and build shared identity. A key step towards establishing a common organizational profile requires us to increase and improve the data in candid profiles on GuideStar. So for those of you who are not familiar, GuideStar, they take your Form 990, right? They create a profile based on the information that you submit in that Form 990, whether you ask them to or not. It's just a standard procedure. They've got a relationship with the IRS. So they realized too that information can be very valuable. So they figured out a way to kind of rearrange it and add value, but they also have figured out other questions that they can ask and have you to add more value to your own profile, right? And we'll talk about that later in the presentation. But what I thought was interesting here is they really talk about the impact. They say, look in the yellow area, it says GuideStar currently includes data on 1.8 million registered nonprofits, making it easier to understand who they are and what they do. Nonprofits, I'm losing my place. Nonprofits are encouraged to update their profiles at no cost to them, and as of December 2023, 96,325 organizations had earned a Candid Seal of Transparency. By doing so, they increased their visibility on Candid's platforms that are accessed by 12 plus million people each year. This information is also made available through donor platforms that use our tools, including technology companies, donor advised funds, and giving platforms which use our information to increase access to trusted data. All right, blah, blah, blah. So you see, they really, really took advantage of this opportunity to tell us probably more than we care to know, but you have to admit it gives good information to help us to really understand what their impact is and how many people they touch. All right, another major part that funders are looking at are is part 9. That's your statement of functional expenses, and what your functional expenses are. They're expenses that are grouped into basically 3 major categories. One would be your program and service expenses. Two would be your management and general admin expenses. And then three would be your fundraising expenses. So the form has line items, going down the line, but these line items are broken out into various columns. So so that the reader, and in this case, we're focused on the funder gets to understand, okay, so for every dollar, how much is going into program? Is it 60 cents? Is it 70 cents? Is it 80 cents? Is it 90 cents? How much is going into administration? Is it 10 cents, 20 cents, 30 cents? How much is going into fundraising? All right. So that gives them a really clear indication of how much money is actually going to fulfill your nonprofit mission. As a rule of thumb, I know when I was coming up, a rule of thumb was to use 10% for admin, about what, 10, maybe 15% for fundraising, right? And then what's left, about 75%, 75 to 80% for programs and services. And usually, folks are like, oh, it's a red flag if you find that you're spending, you know, less than 70% on programs and services. Often, if you see more than 70%, it might have something to do with the way you're actually allocating the expenses, across these line items. And then sometimes people really are somewhat wasteful. But at any rate, that's going to vary. Even the IRS, even though they have benchmarks, they realize that no two organizations are the same, and no two industries within the nonprofit sector or subsectors are the same. So depending on what you do and what your funding source is, you're going to have varying cost structures, right? And in the event that something might look out of whack, you might use your Schedule O to explain things that might look a little odd. to people. But bottom line, when we look at part nine, what can we find out? We can find out how healthy the organization is financially, whether or not you're spending what would be considered too much on general administrative costs and fundraising costs, and how much money is actually going to fund your nonprofit purpose. So some of the strategies, I would recommend for completing this section, make sure that you have a proper allocation, of your expenses, and sometimes, we could be doing quote unquote the right thing the wrong way. For example, if we look at our salary costs, one mistake that I've made and I've seen on the Form 990 is people taking salary costs and automatically putting that in your administrative column. The truth of the matter is, it takes people, right, in order to administer these programs. They're going to be spending X percent of their time actually doing the program, Y percent of their time fundraising, and Z percent of their time doing administration. So you need to make sure that that allocation, you know, adequately represent what's going on. If you're not careful, it if you lump all of your salaries in admin, it could it could look like you're spending 80% of your resources on admin, and that's not a good look, right? If there are any line items, again, that look questionable, then you might want to put a footnote. And when I say footnote, you might want to explain in Schedule O anything, like I said, be proactive. Anything that looks a little different than it normally does, anything that might look a little different from similar organizations, you might want to use Schedule O to explain. All right. Make sure that once you do your Form 990, you post on your website. I know the tendency is for people to try to keep as many secrets as they can about their nonprofit organizations. The truth of the matter is, by law, you as a nonprofit are required to present your Form 90s publicly. In fact, on Form 990, you have to describe how you're going to make the Form 990 public. And if you don't comply, and when I say comply, if somebody asks you for it and you don't provide it, they can file a complaint with the IRS, and you really don't want to get in trouble with the IRS. And given that this is public information anyway, it's in your best interest to provide it publicly. And in fact, if you put it on your website, as the IRS recommends, if you put it on your website, you can just refer people to your website rather than, arranging meetings to have them come and inspect the documents on premises, blah, 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 blah. So, what might that look like? You don't necessarily have to follow this format, but I think this is a really good way to do it. Charity Water, they are an international organization that focuses on making sure that developing countries have good, clean water. And what they have done, they have gone over and beyond the call of duty in terms of disclosure. At a very bare minimum for disclosure, you need to do the Form 990. That's going to be posted on the IRS website. It's going to be posted on the GuideStar website, and now other websites. You may as well do it yourself, right? Um, what I like about what they've done, they have provided information again over and beyond the Form 990 to a point where they've got the highest level of disclosure guaranteed or granted by candidates. So they have reached the platinum level of transparency, and I'll share what that means. But they also, in addition to putting that badge on their website, that's like a good clean bill of health, right? It's like, oh, we know they can be trusted if they've gone through all of that, sharing all of that information. And on top of that, they have a link to their annual report, they have a link to their audit report, they have a link to their audit for their model. So not only are they sharing, the audit report, but they're also going that extra mile to show that their financial models that they're using to actually generate the financials are intact, following uh, gap. And then they share the form 990, and they do that, for many years, several years going back. So I think this would be a great model to share, and you might want to put your own twist on it. And that's a good way, I think, of raising money in your sleep. People from the public, potential funders, they can look at that information and, you know, get a lot of their questions answered before they even approach you. All right, so you can leverage your Form 990 by claiming your GuideStar profile. So if you have not completed a GuideStar profile, you can go on to GuideStar. You can type in your organization's name or EIN. They will have a GuideStar profile for you if you have completed, the long form. And then if you haven't claimed it, you go through the process of claiming it, and then you can update it yourself. For every level of transparency, they provide a badge. So at the very basic level, you've got the Form 990. You get no points for that. At the bronze level, there's a certain amount of disclosure for those who want to give more information. There's silver, there's gold for those who give more, and then platinum for those who give even more. And it really, really does work to your advantage, I believe, to give more information. All right. So, some of the advantages for completing your GuideStar profile: one, you get to write your own narrative. GuideStar, they're going to glean information that you put on your 990, and they're going to put it onto your profile, but the profile itself gives you more opportunity to go into more detail about some of those questions, right? And then there's some questions that they have on there that are not on the Form 990. You can really get a better sense for who you are as an organization. Another advantage is you get to download a dashboard report that can be shared with your board and other stakeholders, and it will behoove you really to, not only do the profile and claim it, but to get that bronze level or any other level beyond that so that you can share a richer report. Another advantage is the fact that your information is automatically shared with 200 or more charitable sites, and that includes Salesforce, Facebook, donor advised funds, and Network for Good. And again, there's 200 sites that your information would be on, so again, you're marketing in your sleep. So it's really important that you present yourself in the best light. And organizations that complete GuideStar profiles, again, they've increased their fundraising as high as 53%. Now, caution you, just because some organizations get a 53% increase just as a result of, using the disclosure, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have the same result. But I will say that over time, the more information you give, and the fact that you're being positioned with other organizations that are doing the same types of disclosure, that increases your know, like, and trust factor, and that automatically releases more funds. All right. So, in order to get a bronze seal, you need to provide, certain information, stuff like your contact information, your donation information, your mission statement, and leadership information. And the purpose for this particular level is to provide basic information and to ensure that you can be found by funders. So there are a few questions that you're going to ask that will help enter your organization in a searchable database where people can find you under different categories. All right. So to get the silver seal, you're going to have to provide everything that you provided under the bronze. And the purpose there is to share your programs, build your brand, and display your nonprofit's latest activities with donors. So, in addition to everything you share with bronze, you're going to be sharing program details such as your name, brief description, and geographic data. I'm sorry, geographic area served. And this is really going to be an even better narrative than you can provide on Form 990, even if you are going into a lot of detail on Form 990. You can be more creative and artistic in your presentation here. You also can let people know whether or not you're a grant maker. Some organizations, in addition to, our traditional foundations, some organizations actually take money from foundations and they re-grant it. So if you re-grant funds, you can share that information. You can also, again, be concerned about your branding, things like your logo, your tagline, your website and social media account. All of that stuff you can add. And then for a goal seal, you you can add additional information, and this is information that will speak to your capacity and capabilities. So that would be things like your most recent 2 years of financials. If you have audited statements, that would be great to add. If you don't have financial statements, make sure you get statements up there that are recent, that are conforming to generally accepted accounting principles. And then you can also include things like your board chair's name and then your leader's demographics. So you can actually speak to your board makeup in terms of race and gender and sexual preference and all of that stuff. So people really get a sense for who you are as an organization. And then if you want to go to the highest level, you have to provide all of that information. But in addition to that, you want to provide information that demonstrates impact and strategy. All right. So you're going to look at strategy and goals. You can upload your strategic plan. You can answer a couple questions that they have that speak to strategy. And then you can also share metrics and let people know, how many people you're serving and other ways that you can judge your progress. And you want to share at least one impact-based metric. All right. So this metric from 2022, that could be a metric from, your most recent year. Um, the 22, I got that from the GuideStar website, and they probably should update it. All right, so at this point, I'm going to take questions. And again, if you want to see how GuideStar profiles can work, we did in fact do a video on GuideStar profiles, and you can check those out. All right, if you have any questions, please feel free to post. It doesn't look like there are any questions. All right, there being no other questions, I will let you go. Make sure that you tune in next week. We're going to be talking about how you can use the Form 990 to better understand the ethics of an organization. All right, take care. Bye bye.